This is the 18th season of Bass Talk Live. With your host, Matt Pangrath. BTL is brought to you by Lowrance, Bass Cat Boats, AFCO, Strike King Lures, Sunline, Big Bite Baits, Spro, X-Zone Lures, Gamakatsu, The Bass Tank, Denali Rods, and Pro Guide Batteries.
BTL, coming at ya!
Good morning and welcome to another exciting edition of BTL Bass Talk Live, where we're going to talk about bass fishing. It is Monday, May 23rd, post Lake Fork, which is becoming an annual rite of passage on the Elite Series. How many guys will get the Century belt? And we have a special in-studio guest today, all the way from the Bass Tank headquarters up by Tulsa. Is that Sepulpa? What is that town? Sepulpa.
Yeah.
We have the mad scientist in studio, Scott Palmer.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for jumping in
Absolutely.
for BTL. Now, we were going to have you in studio a couple months ago, Scott, and then Mother Nature decided a freak ice storm.
Yeah.
I should not have been in studio for that show. I still decided to come down, but we said, hey, we'll have you on location to do a Q&A session about electronics because, I mean, you're the mad scientist. You own the Bass Tank. This is kind of your jam. You actually know, and that's kind of when we went into side imaging and down imaging and how the systems actually work. Got a lot of great feedback from that because I think the more you understand the tools that you use, the better you can utilize them.
Yeah, that's absolutely
fair
correct.
assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it.
So then I was like, man, I got to get you back in studio before both of our schedules get crazy because obviously I tournament fish, you tournament fish. The Bass Tank is exploding every time I go there. There's like, and here's the new edition, and here's the new edition here, and then there's like boats lined up to get in to get all the electronics done. So we had a little bit of a break. So I said, hey, why don't you come down this week? Wanted to go over a couple more things, take a couple questions. So anyway, first time to the BTL studio. Mark did a pretty nice job. I was trying to figure out, I had the foliage a little bit higher, and then it literally looked like we were doing the show out of Jumanji with the way that, so I had to...
That's a good effect, though, Hey, deep from the jungles of the bass fishing world, here is Bass Talk Live, so...
I had to rearrange... the foliage a little bit, but... 4 anglers this past week on Lake Fork, the Bassmaster Elite Series on Lake Fork, May 19th through 22nd. And Lee Livesey, his second win of the year. He's got a new baby. He's 36 years old. He's in the Classic. He just won on Lake Fork, his home lake. He blew it away, 113 pounds, 11 ounces. Brandon Polinick and Gerald Swindle both had 102.2, and then Shane LaHue hit the mark at 100 pounds, 9 ounces. But it's kind of weird when 25-pound bags are the norm to stay in contention. And as small as it is, boy, there's some little features on Lake Fork that protect it and keep it one of the best fisheries in the country. Did you get a chance to watch any of that, Scott?
I got to watch a little bit of it. I was trying to keep track, obviously with its location, Fork is a lake I've been on frequently. Yeah. And it was kind of cool to see the guys like, oh, I know exactly where he's doing, I know exactly where he's at, Not saying I could go smash the 25-pound bags.
So you've been there quite a bit?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been on Fork a lot. There were several of the guys, and I said, hey, dude, look to the left. That ditch is, of course, these guys are pros, and so they're going to look left, and they know where that little drain comes in, why those fish are setting up. So it was really cool to see. And but just think about it. You go catch 25 pounds a day in any tournament. You're going to come to scales feeling pretty good about yourself.
Yeah.
But not on Fork. You're still, if you caught 25 pounds a day, you're still 13 pounds behind the leader. So
it was interesting to see how a lot of those guys attacked it or approached it with the all or nothing approach.
Yep.
With either the swim baits or, and I know there's a limited number of spots with a lot of vessels on a body of water, but it seemed like a lot of guys said this is this is where I'm going to make hay. I'm going to go up in flames there with the size of the baits they were throwing, their commitment and dedication to spots. I think that tournament, and as the guys fish it more and more, because remember, there hadn't been a lot of professional level events on Fork until they did that catch-way release with the Marshalls, because there's a slot.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it? Is it 16?
No, it's bigger than that. I believe
16 to 22.
Yeah, it's 16 to 24, I believe, or maybe even 17 to 24. It's that perfect fish size to take to the scales, and so you've got to have a monster to be able to bring it to the scales, and you only get one of them.
And we're seeing what Texas Parks and Wildlife has done with fisheries across the state is absolutely incredible. Obviously, with OH Ivy popping off, and some of the other fisheries around there with the weights that it's taken, the number of big fish. So not a surprise that 4 anglers broke that 100-pound mark. But the more I dive into Lake Fork, the more angry I am that I've been here, central Oklahoma. It's a 3-hour drive down to Lake Fork. Well, I lived in Norman, Morse. Dude, this is where the area is for 12 years, 13 years, and then was up in Tulsa. Now I'm in Shawnee. But I went up to Grand all the time, no problem. 3-hour drive, northeast Oklahoma. Yeah. It's literally 15 minutes further to get to the Wolf Creek boat ramp at Grand than it is to go down to Lake Fork and dump it on Lake Fork. Never done it. I went out with James Niggemeyer to shoot some stuff for Bass Insider way back in the day. I've been on it one time in my life.
That is disappointing.
It's 3 hours away, Scott.
Yeah, well, and that's one reason, we're up there in the Tulsa area, and I love that area for that reason. If I drop a pin 3 hours circle, I'm in some great fisheries, and that's one reason why Fork, going back to, I can't even remember the first time I started. Listen, my first experience on Lake Fork was we took my buddy's John boat, I kid you not, with a trolling motor. We had a truck tent. So it's a tent that pops up in the bed of the truck.
Okay.
We literally took the John boat and slid it into the back of a little creek I like to call Running Creek, and we went out there and fished, and then we would come back and camp on the side of the road. That's how we started. Luckily things have changed. I was a broke college kid at that time, basically is what it boiled down to, and so don't have to do the side of the road thing anymore. If you do, that's still great. I'm not knocking it all. I wouldn't change that for anything. But the first fish I ever caught on Fork was this homemade spinnerbait. And my buddy had been there a couple times, and he said, "Hey, this is the skirt you need to throw. Just a big, Colorado blade spinnerbait." And I remember I was sitting there reeling, and you have to understand, I was still relatively new to the lake fishing side of bass fishing. As crazy as that sounds, I fished ponds growing up, but bass fishing in a lake, I was still pretty new. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, "Oh, I guess I'm hung up on the grass." And so I'm literally sitting here doing this, and my buddy looks at me and says, "Scott, set the hook." I'm like, "What?" And I have time to look at him, and then boom, I set the hook, 6.5 pounder. How stupid was that? It's just like, wow, dude, you didn't even know that was a bite. Now I'm like, oh, there's a subtle bite. But that was just awesome. That was the first night we were there, and then we just smashed them. Didn't catch anything huge, but you just looked at it like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Yeah. And so had some amazing trips on Lake Fork. And right now it's low. That's the other thing. I was sitting there looking at it, and it looks like about 3 foot low maybe. And that really repositions those fish, totally. Fork can just be overwhelming with the amount of, stumps, because you look at it and say, oh, I need to flip this stump. I need to flip this stump. Well, when you have that many, there's a little subtle differences that those fish key on. And that's why we always look for those drains and everything else. And, back before the forward facing sonar craze came on, we were still using electronics to just find those little drains, and so you have a little submerged point within the pockets and things like that, and that seemed to always hold fish, and then you would go find the flats, so I saw him throwing, like you said. I was literally telling a buddy of mine, we were watching it, and I said, oh, right there, I said, he probably needs to throw a spoon. I know Polinick was using that big crankbait, and I said, he's going to pick up a spoon here in a minute, because I've spooned that spot. And he was like, what, man? He's like, you throw a spoon a lot. I'm like, well, sometimes a spoon is the thing to do, and next picture showed Polinick, ripping a spoon, and he lost that 3 or 4 pounder on it. And he said, oh, I guess you're right. I said, well, I've been there a few times, so
it's one of those fisheries. I think it's kind of intimidating to go because you know all that. Now, granted, you can get a boat lanes chip down there for now too. But it's I think if you know someone down there to kind of show you the ropes around a little bit, it's a little bit easier to get around. But where was I going with that? I was going. Oh, you mentioned the Lake Fork was low. So we saw earlier this year on the BPT how much, when it was like 6-7 foot low, how much the wood played, and the guys picking fish off of the wood. We've seen what Patrick Walters has done there before, but with the post spawn fish this year and going offshore, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but it's weird how in this sport there's certain little things that guys say that stick with you, like in your head, and it kind of affects how you fish for years to come. Because look at BTL, Bass Live, the BPT stuff. There's so much information coming in. I get emails and messages and DMs from people that are like, "Well, how do you sift through all this information?" Like I talked with Matt Becker the other day about 40 minutes on one drop shot setup. Yeah. And I had a couple people that were like, "Well, how do you pick through all that?" And I was like, that's a good point. But I say that to say there's I did a real quick interview probably 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years ago on Toledo Bend. And it was with Todd Faircloth. And I was covering it for the Bass Zone. And, I was shooting photos. And pretty much the only place you can shoot photos there is on the side of the boat lanes. And then, the photos are awesome because it's just a sea of, it's forest. It's literal forest. They flooded forest.
Yeah.
And then cut the trees off for create the boat lanes, put the little stakes up, and that's where you can run. And I was talking to him about, you see these guys out in the middle of the forest.
Yeah.
Well, when you're shooting photos, it's like, how the heck do you find that stuff? And I did a little article with him about when everything looks so great. And he's like, man, he said the key is on timber lakes, he goes, you have to treat it like there's no timber.
Yeah.
He goes, you just fish it with the timber there. He goes, but you have to reprogram your mind not to go tree, stump. And he said, you can't be fishing areas because there's cover there. And would a tree be cover or structure? I know Hallman's gone through all this.
So the way it was explained to me was cover was
to call Brad on this.
Cover is anything that is not attached. This is a
okay. So this would be structure. The tree would be structure.
Yeah.
But you have to take the wood out of the equation.
You take the wood out of the equation.
So that in a lot of cases, the wood's getting in the way. So those fish could be on wood anywhere because there's wood everywhere.
Yep.
Right.
That's exactly right.
But you have to clear that out of your brain and treat it just like a Table Rock.
Yep.
Well, that's got trees in it too. Treat it just like a Grand Lake.
Yep. Exactly.
Or any of those lakes that don't have any of that cover, and that's where you fish then.
Yep. Yeah, and
which is hard to do because then he went a step further, and then I was talking to Casey Scanlon back in the day, or James Watson about Lake of the Ozarks, because I had a tournament there 5-6 years ago, and they said the same thing about Lake of the Ozarks. Don't fish Lake of the Ozarks because there's docks there. Fish Lake of the Ozarks because of what's underneath the docks in the location. And then the docks are just there.
Yep, that's exactly right. The docks should end up just being an obstacle, having, a couple tournaments out there myself. And it's overwhelming. I'm like, man, I'm going to go fish docks. And you pull into a pocket and you spend 3 hours fishing a little pocket. Then you look at like, how am I ever going to fish this tournament?
Yeah.
And it's because, you try to fish behind every dock and you've got to change how you approach it for sure. And, I equate it to, fall fishing. You're looking for that isolated cover, right? So that isolated brush pile. Mm-hmm. So remove the trees. I'm looking for that isolated rock ledge, that isolated step, that isolated shell bed, whatever that feature is without the trees there. That's how I approach, wood lakes, because it can be overwhelming. I mean, I remember the first time I was on Fork, it was just like, my eyes were just like, how do you even do this? How do you even fish it? Because every time you turn around, the boat's getting hung up on,
absolutely.
And you're just like, it's not a great sound when you're hearing your very expensive investment. And I don't care if you've got a 1970 Kingfisher or if you've got a brand new, Bass Cat. There is nothing that sounds worse than wood scraping down your
because typically the stump is there's like a little piece of the stump that'll be sticking out, and every time you go over a stump you think, well, I just unzipped the boat.
Yep, that's exactly
because
right.
it's because that wood breaking and then transmitting through the fiberglass hull sounds like you just ran over a piece of rebar.
Yep.
And then you like get out and like get underneath and you're like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah, it is the worst sound in the world. It was difficult for me the first time I had my own personal boat there to go through it and say, wow, this is actually happening. Or you get stuck and you have to corkscrew off of it. That one will make you feel real good about what you're doing.
I said, since you've been there then, and I don't want to go down the electronics path just yet because I'm sure you're enjoying not talking about electronics. I know it's your living and stuff, but I mean, that's all you talk about.
Little thing people don't know about me is I'm actually a really big nerd.
Yeah.
And so I geek out on this stuff. So, when it'll come up.
But do you think Fork, so since they've started going there every single year for the Elite Series, it's kind of coincided with the growth of the forward-facing sonar. They started there 3-4 years ago. I mean, now it was out there with the Panoptics and stuff like that. Right. But, I mean, since everybody had it, do you think part of the reason I know Fork is a great fishery, but so deep in that field is these guys are getting better and better with it, and the weights wouldn't be as top heavy without the ability to use forward facing sonar? Or is Fork just that good of a fishery?
I think it's a little combination of both. You've got some of the best fishermen in the world, putting them on a great fishery and saying, hey, go run amok. Mm-hmm. And these guys didn't think, most of these guys haven't been, they're not rookies. And so they've been around for a long time, being able to do it without forward facing sonar. And then you put a tool in an expert's hand, and as they learn how to master that tool, they're going to know how to leverage it to the best of its ability. So I think it's a combination of both, because it can kind of going back to that isolated that isolated structure in the trees. Well, those fish could kind of hide in it, because if you look at a lot of the mapping, it's hard for the sonar companies that produce these maps to go map a lake that is, Toledo Bend or Fork.
Yeah.
It's
finish that thought, and I want to go circle back to it.
Because so you can't go do a lot of map studying as far as on your electronics. You've got to go dig into like old topo maps, like literally paper maps, which no doubt guys have done that. I'm sure, pre-build of the lake. And how much of that has changed or silted in over the course of the years. And so these guys now with forward-facing sonar, I can look out there and I can see, oh, there's a ditch out there. There's a rock. There's a hard spot amongst all this sand. Guess what that's going to hold? That's going to hold my fish. And so I think it's allowing them to open up some possibilities. Or, when they get up in the trees, like in the fall, then you can target them and specifically, hit, specific fish, but they still have to know what area to be in. That's the thing about it. It's one thing when I can see a fish and I can throw a bait at it, but I still have to have the knowledge to know where to even begin looking, and that's where this starts way back at the beginning. The actual act of seeing a fish on forward facing sonar and throwing at it is the culmination of a lot of prep work.
Yeah.
Of understanding how I found that fish to begin with. The very few lakes, especially if you're in wood, can you just go out there and just drive around just scanning with forward-facing sonar, just getting after it? That's really not a possibility, because you're going to miss a lot of fish because they're going to hide behind trees and you're going to be bouncing off trees, and so it's a difficult task. So,
just a little side note: if you're hearing anything in the background, it's not the apocalypse. It's like I said, we had an ice storm the last time. There's some pretty strong thunderstorms going through the area right now, so we might have a few thunder boomers, but we're golden for now. So I really like what you mentioned there, because Fork was one of the first tournaments that I think, the focus has always been so much lately on the forward facing sonar, but you mentioned several things, including the mapping, and that's where my general question is. But Fork was a great example of tying everything together with what you mentioned, getting in the right areas because of the mapping, finding schools of fish using your side imaging, and then the sweet spot on the spot using the forward-facing sonar. And I don't think especially with typically such a northern heavy schedule now and a pre-spawn spawn schedule, you don't get a ton of tournaments where you can tie all of those elements together. Now, you mentioned the mapping, and this is cool because I've actually known a couple guys who do this for like summer jobs. And if you've ever been on the water, you'll sometimes see, I mean, they're basically it's a boat, and you're like, is that an electroshocking boat?
Yeah.
What is that? What is that? You probably have a really good understanding of this, but when you buy a chip, when it has the mapping, when you do an update on your unit, how is a lake actually mapped? Like, how do they know that there's a 1 foot ditch there? Just run through the process of a company mapping a lake and how that's done.
Okay, so there's a couple different ways. Initially, before these lakes, especially, in our part of the world, most of them are just dammed up man-made created lakes.
Right.
Before that was a lake, there was a topographic map. There was a survey done, and so your initial base maps are going to start with that. Companies are going to base their original premise off of that. And so essentially what happens is they take a survey boat out there, and they'll have a big sonar that they actually drag behind the boat most of the time. That is, they call it a fish. And if you ever see the History Channel or National Geographic or whatever, and they're out there looking for shipwrecks, that thing they tow behind the boat, that's just a very fancy version of what we use to find fish to begin with. But so they'll have something of that nature, and so they'll just go out there and they make passes. And one thing you have to understand is if I am going this direction and then I make a circle and then I come back and hit that at a different angle, I may get a different reading because those sonar beams are coming back. So it's a very critical thing to go back and basically make a broom pattern. So I'm just literally coming back and forth, going the same.
Sweeping it,
yeah.
Okay.
Sweeping it, paralleling my pass, coming back the opposite direction. Because if you start making these crazy diagonal patterns, you're not going to get an accurate mapping. So that's kind of how they build them. Now, something that is no doubt becoming a thing, and I'll just tell you straight up, I don't know how deep most companies are into this, but I know it's going to be a thing in the future, is satellites are getting better and better being able to look through the water and give returns.
What?
Yeah, it's kind of stupid what they can do now.
Wait.
Yeah. Now, are they able to give you contours? I don't know. But are they able to give you hard spots within the water?
So they're shooting stuff out of the satellite and measuring the density of the ground that it's hitting, and obviously it's going through the water.
Yep.
So they're able to make heat maps of lakes using those satellites in a roundabout way?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if I'd call it a heat map specifically, but, it's going to be a density map. And so, obviously, rock is going to come back, brighter than sand is, a soft clay bottom. So now, again, I don't know if they're heavily using that right now, but I know that's where we're going to go in the future. Because I already know they're using that. Archaeologists are using it for out in the Sahara Desert to find lost civilizations. They're like, oh, check this out. We pull back all the sand and here's this city, and you've heard of LIDAR maybe. This is where they remove the foliage and they're finding, Amazonian lost civilizations, lost cities. It's just a matter of time before they completely are unable to, do that in the lakes. They already do it how do you think they map the ocean? How do you think we have the maps of the ocean? Think how big that is, and someone having to drive back and forth and broom the ocean.
That's a good point.
And so that's
using satellites.
Yeah. Now we're talking about multi-million, billion-dollar companies, governmental agencies doing a lot of those things, but it's just a matter of time before that becomes a thing. And I think you're going to get more accurate maps with that.
So, like when I was at the Open at Ross Barnett. Okay, so let's do a full loop on this process.
Yeah.
So they have. So you have what, like Navionics, CMAP,
Lake Master.
Yep. Would you say those are the three major players?
Yeah.
What else is there?
There's some independent companies out there that will. It's kind of cool, and I apologize. I can't remember who they are.
No, that's fine.
I want to say they're down in Louisiana, but you can literally say, "Hey, take this map of this lake
and go map it for me."
And go and give this to me on a chip. Like you can go to Google Earth Pro, where you can go back in time and say, hey, I want this overlaid onto my map, and they will do it. And you can basically put different, hey, I want to know where the shoreline was 5 years ago. Because, if a lake is down, say 10 feet for any extended period of time, you're going to get growth that would have otherwise been choked out because of the water.
Okay.
So then that water comes back up, and you've got a secondary shoreline that now has new features on it, and that may hold fish. Well, you could take that based off a Google Earth image.
I got you.
And that you basically an overlay on it. So now with that, you have to pay for each individual lake. So it's not entirely financially fiscal, not fiscal, but
feasible.
Feasible. That's what I was trying to say. Because there's a lot of lakes out there.
Yeah.
But at some point they may get it where they do package deals. I don't know yet, but it's there's just a lot of mapping out there. But the three you talked about are the
okay. So then like I said, this is stuff I should know, and I might get in trouble by saying the wrong thing here, but I'm going through it because I want to understand it. So obviously, like Lake Masters is associated with Humminbird,
correct?
And then, like I have a C map on my Lowrance, but then is Navionics compatible with?
So Navionics was the kind of, I don't want to call them the general universal with everybody. They kind of would work through everything. Garmin bought Navionics, and so Garmin, that is now overlaid onto Garmin. So if you own a Garmin unit and you bought a Navionics chip, you would need to make sure it says Garmin Navionics. If you just get the Navionics, it's going to go back and be compatible with your Lowrance.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how they work there from that standpoint.
Okay, so we understand. So these companies go out and they pay to have a boat that is rigged with this thing that they tow behind, that I'm assuming is not assuming, I know it records the bottom depth, and they pay whatever. It could be your full-time job, it could be I had a college kid who's on the fishing team that works for that's how I know how it is, and they get trained in going back and forth on these lakes. So then it would make sense, like it would be extremely hard to do a Toledo Bend of Lake Fork. So is that why when you go to these fisheries, you've got the platinum, you've got the best chips that you can have, which I don't, that's a whole different discussion. Yeah. But like Ross Barnett, where I just went to, tons of backwater, less than a foot, stuffy, and it's just blue. Or red, or void. Is that because, and you've got a very defined, channel, everything that you can idle back and forth on is marked, but is that because literally you can't put a boat and go back and forth on that, so they just say, hey, this stuff is unmapped? Yeah,
pretty much. That's basically what it boils down to. You'll see a hard line and it says, hey, this is shallow water. Now, something of note right here is your units, no matter what manufacturer, has the ability to draw those contours. And so, for example, I was in a tournament and there were some backwater areas that I was wanting to fish. And so I was seeing if I could get into them. And as I got into them, I didn't want to idle in during tournament day. I want to know if I could run in there. Yes, that's sketchy, I know, but listen, tournament time is tournament time. And so as I was coming in, I was mapping. I was literally drawing the difference, my contours as I came in. Now, I found that true ditch that I knew I can safely run in here this far. And so in each manufacturer handles it just a little bit differently than how you do it, but it's relatively easy, and you can just build it right there on the map as you're going along, as you're idling along. So, and I do that on some of my local lakes, think of the smaller lakes that aren't mapped, that I've fished forever.
I can think of one right now.
Absolutely.
And I remember back in the day when we were doing the college bass, so this would have been like 2014, 2015. That was like when Insight Genesis came out, and their big thing was you map it and then you upload it, and then you can put it on a chip and put it back on your unit. Right.
And that was where, hey, upload it so we can process it for you. We can render it for you. Now the companies are getting to the point where they've had the processing power to render it right there on the units themselves.
So my HES 12 Live that I run, I'm on Ross Barnett. I'm on a massive pad field, and I want to find the ditch.
Yeah.
Had I had it dialed in, like maximizing its capabilities, I could draw that entire flat with a contour map as I idled it and said, hey, I'm going to go a day early. I know this is how it's going to be won.
Yep.
I know this is a thing, ditches and 3-foot pad fields that are just blue.
Yeah.
And I could have built my entire own map, looked at it and said, there's the ditch.
There's the ditch. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's pretty easy to do.
I think it is. Again, I'm a nerd, so I push buttons and I do things that, some people are scared to do.
How come I don't hear about more people doing this?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I mean, is it just me, or am I missing the boat here, or is everyone doing it quietly, or is it you don't hear the pros talk about it? You don't hear, what did you do today? Oh, I went out and mapped so and so.
I honestly don't know. I could not tell you why you don't hear more about it, because it's something I use a lot. Because the other side of it is, let's say I've got my premium mapping, on, let's just take Lake Eufaula, Oklahoma. Okay.
Right.
We have if we were going to fish any local, Oklahoma trails, you're going to go to Lake Eufaula at least once. Well, you want to talk about a lake that changes a lot because of its bottom composition. It's a river lake. It's fed by, multiple rivers.
I know where you fish now.
Yeah.
Not where I fish.
Yeah. But hey, I fish all over. No. But the sand.
Purim doesn't change.
No, Purim doesn't change. Let's be real clear.
But yeah, the rest of it.
The rest of it changes.
Tens of thousands of acres that are fed by silted and shallow.
Exactly. And so you can go to a spot that was a hard point at one day, and then slowly over time it's become rounded because it's silted. And so when I'm just generally fishing, I will just run my map. Even in tournaments, the first thing I do.
When you say run your map.
Well, I'm sorry, record my map. I draw a map. And so I literally, even during tournaments, I will just hit the button and say, hey, record this. Record what I'm doing today. Because then it will overlay that map on top of the other map. Because I'm actually drawing it with a real time. Because the transducers we're using are capable enough to go, map the contours. So.
What percentage of people do you think do this or know how to do this? It was like a thing. I feel like it was a thing when it first came out, like 2014, 2015. Yep. Hey, like you said, you got this little lake. Now you got contours on it. But it still seems really valuable.
I don't know why. I think it is. I mean, I think it's very valuable. I think it's invaluable. I think it's something you've got to do personally. But, some guys, maybe guys get into, I'm shooting in the dark here. So this is an assumption. I apologize if I'm wrong. But I think some guys maybe get caught into their patterns, and I'm just going
100%. That's what I do. I'm comfortable with it. I know what I'm looking at. I know how the unit works. It works perfectly every single time. I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
On that chip, on my Lowrance, when it says there's going to be a drop, there's a drop. When it says it's going to be shallow, it's shallow.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I don't fine tune it.
Yeah.
But I found, and after being in the same general area as Lee Livesey in the open on Ross Barnett and seeing guys out on flats and stuff going, the heck are they doing out there? And going to Oneida last year and then going to Oneida next month and seeing guys out going, what the heck are those guys doing out there? They're looking for bottom hardness. They're looking for little ditches. They're looking for all this stuff to where, I've got great mapping on it and it works, but there's still an element of the unknown. Well, that unknown is the edge that the guys have that's allowing them to go, dude, it was super easy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I mean, the prime example is one of my favorite lakes that's close to my house. And it's funny because if I actually put my waypoints on it, it's insane how many waypoints. Like, I don't think you can actually run the map because there's so many stupid waypoints. And I don't know why I need them at this point because I just know the lake like the back of my hand. But every time I'm out there, no matter what time of year, I say, hey, I've got this section of the lake I need to map. And I will just go and I'll say, I'm going to make 2 passes. And guess what? It's a lake I fish enough that, guess what? I've almost mapped the entire lake at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it has changed. It's really funny because when I actually do overlay my waypoints on top of the mapping,
you're like, that makes sense.
That makes sense. If I would have had this mapping, I may not even had to, scan it. But guess what? When I'm doing that, I'm also seeing new features. This lake, like I knew the back of my hand, now I'm seeing stuff that I'd never seen, never thought to see, just because I'm out graphing, and just whatever. And so, I mean, it takes 15 minutes to literally, whatever. And the other side is, as funny as this is, with the trolling motors, and if you're running like a trolling motor that connects to your units, I can draw a route for my trolling motor. I say, hey, trolling motor, take me off. And then I sit down and I play Angry Birds,
And it takes you.
So it literally goes in and graphs for me. I don't have to idle, If I want to, I can sit there and play Angry Birds while I'm, graphing.
or
I can pay
answer
attention.
calls or whatever.
Yes, I wish I could say I was actually playing Angry Birds. I'm actually answering calls or trying to pay attention to what you're seeing on your sonar, because you'll see things that you didn't realize were even there.
It was BTL on a Monday. We were with the mad scientist Scott Palmer from the Bass Tank. Wasn't really planning on going into that Mavic part, but that's phenomenal stuff. That's something that I think is just little features that you don't realize that are easy to use once you understand how to use them.
Yep.
And I think especially when it comes to the electronics, I think it's a lot about like the cell phone. I think there's two types of people. There's people who check their emails, their Facebook, and make calls on it, and there's the people who go, "Hey, look what you can do with your phone."
Yep.
And there's some people that will always just use it as their phone to make calls. There's some people that will always be up to date with the latest and be waiting in line at the iPhone store for it. But I think the majority of people fall into that group that would like to know how to use it more, would like to get comfortable with it, but don't know it exists and don't know where they can turn to actually find it, apply it, and get comfortable with it. And that's kind of the world that you live in, is you're at the top, but you spend a lot of your time getting that middle 80% of the population who is invested in 9, 12, 15-inch graphs, thousands of dollars on it to maximize their time on the water with what they have.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really, that's how the Bass Tank got started, honestly, was realizing that there was a gap, quite frankly. And with my background, in a former life, and then with John's background, just being
obsessed.
Yeah, that's a good word. That's a good word.
John Sogum, obviously, is who we're talking about.
And that's what made a great partnership, honestly, between he and I. Was I brought that technical side, and he brought the fishing knowledge side. I'll sit here and tell you right now, John is a better fisherman than I am. I'd like to say, hey, I'm going to go beat him, but no, that's just not the case. He is a stick.
He's a better fisherman than pretty much everybody right now. Right now, he's absolutely on fire.
Yeah,
I've talked with Brad Hallman. I've talked with a number of people on this, and he's combined experience with an insane work ethic, a drive to succeed, and he's figured out, is it politically incorrect now to say, a different way to skin a cat? But you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
He's on the same fishery, but he's fishing a different tournament.
Yeah.
We're actually going to have a guest on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Keith Poche.
Yeah.
He's fishing the opens. He's got, I think it's is it a Gator Tracks?
I believe so.
The boat that he runs. But he's fishing a different tournament. Now, it's not always going to work out for him. Yeah. And he said that. He's like, well, sometimes you finish 200th in these things when you bring this. And I said, but he's doing something different.
Yeah.
And he's doing it with insane amount of confidence and talent. And that's what's making him dangerous right now.
And that's, I think you've hit something really on the head. You're not trying to get back too deep into the fork side of things, but confidence was always the thing that I was sitting there thinking, like you looked at all the different ways guys were catching fish, and why did that guy select that bait? And at the end of the day, it's because he had confidence in that bait. He felt like he didn't go try to learn some new technique. And I'm not saying not to learn new techniques, but he had confidence in it. I'll just tell you right now, I love throwing a big worm. Don't get me wrong, I love topwater season. I love the pre-spawn. I love it all. But one of my favorite things to do, secret to beating Scott Palmer, is take all the worms out of his boat, because I love throwing a big worm.
10, 12-inch worm?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brush piles?
Absolutely. I just love dragging it. I love doing it all. I'll Carolina rig it. And so
you lost me there, but continue.
I know. This is a little bit heavier rod, but, you saw G-Man throwing it, and I'm like, hey, there it is, and so, but I've got the utmost confidence in it. I'm not saying that's the only way to catch that fish. You could catch it on a jig or a drop shot or anything else, but I've got the confidence to go catch it on that worm. And I'm going to throw that worm until my hands bleed. I'm going to live and die by it. Because if I feel like that's the way that they'll eat it, I've got the confidence to sit there and throw it 1,000 times. And so don't get caught up. I had someone tell me this one time. They said the hardest fish to catch is somebody else's fish. And I believe that to be 100% true. So don't, learn from these experts. Learn from, that's what we're trying to do, is put information out here. But don't get so caught up in, I've got to throw the exact thing that guy is throwing in the exact color, because you can do that. And your retrieve, your presentation, your everything is different from him. Settle into your style, get confidence with it, and then go to work, So that's my,
It's good advice. Hey, we're going to take our first break of the day.
Okay.
We'll be back after this with Scott Palmer from the Bass Tank.
The time for you to get Active Target Live Sonar is now. Get $200 cash back when you buy Active Target, or $400 back with Active Target and Elite FS9. And change the way you fish. Target fish with Active Target and let Elite FS handle the rest. Active Target is also compatible with HDS Live and HDS Carbon. Active Target by Lowrance.
The new Puma STS has been redesigned from the ground up. With the angler, design, function, and performance in mind, nothing on this new offering was compromised, and the only thing carried over from the previous version is the name. Based on the Soft Touch series hull that started with the flagship Jaguar, this new model is nimble and performs incredibly well at all speeds with either a 250 or 300 horsepower engine. Featuring a new 96-inch wide-body footprint, this hull measures out at 20 foot 7 inches in length. Industry-leading design coupled with tournament-winning performance. The Puma STS from Basscat. Feel the rush.
I've made my living on the water for over 20 years.
For 14 years.
For over 23 years.
I've worn a bunch of different clothing brands over the years.
Some companies big.
And some companies small.
All of them said they were making clothing for us.
But none of them knew us.
None of them were us.
Except for one.
Except for one.
Except one.
AFCO.
AFCO.
AFCO. AFCO.
Fishing isn't part of us. It is us.
The KVD 100 jerkbait. 15 different colors. A perfect combination of roll, wiggle, and flash. Increased castability. 3D eyes. Premium black nickel hooks. KVD. Tie one on. Striking lures.
Get the best patterns backed by tournament data. Start by finding the best 10% of your lake. Know exactly what to look for and what to throw. After that, just put them in the boat. Try the Deep Dive app today.
Look at that beast right there.
Elite Series Pro Daryl Gleason here. My Pro Guide batteries keep me going on those long tournament days and long practice days. Always plenty of juice, never fail. The best part about Pro Guide batteries, it's the people behind the company. They have over 40 years experience in the battery business, keeping all of us fishermen out on the water longer, catching more fish. Check them out at ProGuideBatteries.com.
What's up, Bass Talk Live fans? Brandon Polnick here. And ever since I won a couple Bassmaster Elite Series events on X-Zone Lures, I've been getting a bunch of questions of what makes them so special and different. And really, the truth is, it's in the details. The little details, things like no cheap fillers in their plastic. That gives you more lifelike action, more realistic and vibrant colors. But don't just take my word for it. Go to www.xzonelures.com and check them out for yourself.
Are you looking to install your own fishing electronics? Well, the Bass Tank is here to help you. The solution is the Bass Tank Power Harness. It takes the guesswork out of installation. No more voltage issues or interference. Designed by an engineer so that you can get professional results right there in your own garage. Installation done right with the help of the Bass Tank Power Harness. You can feel confident knowing that your installation was done right. The Bass Tank Power Harness. Give us a call or order yours today at thebasstank.com.
Welcome back, BTL on a Monday with the Mad Scientist, the Bass Tank, Scott Palmer. And Scott, I want to draw attention to, it was a very timely commercial break there. We'll start out. Good derby by Daryl Gleason.
Yeah.
Need to get back on track and had a good tournament on fork. Also, tomorrow, going to do a fork breakdown. Haven't done one of these for the tournament, so instead of just having one guy on to talk about how it is, I want to get a bunch of different angles.
Yeah.
We're going to have Dave Mercer, who will have Lee Livesey on his show. Mercer, along with Jake, the cameraman, which has become like their segment. I don't know if you listened to that at all. I listened to it on the way in and out. So they'll have like a breakdown of how that whole tournament went down. behind the scenes, Jason the Boat with the tournament leaders. Really cool stuff over on Mercer's podcast. But I want to get Dave on for like 5-10 minutes tomorrow, talk a little bit about the scene at Fork, going back, what it's like calling all those crazy weights, the 4th century belts. Also want to get, we will have Chris Zaldane on for a little bit to talk about committing to the massive glide bait, what it's like to lose $500 worth of baits in one day, and kind of the strategy going into Fork. And then also, as we just saw in that X Zone spot, Brandon Polinick, he said he's got a little bit of sketchy service, but he broke the century mark. He also had his first 30-pound bag of his career, finished in second in that. He's going to jump on. And I got Lee's contact info just today and just shot him a text to see if he wants to jump on for a couple minutes. I can't imagine having a new baby, winning the Open, winning Fork back-to-back. We saw how crazy it was after he won last year. The guy is beloved by media, anglers, friends, community. And so at some point in the future, we'll have him on for a full show. But Scott, did you know? And I got some of this from a article over on Bass Fan. He said he's the 14th angler with 3 Elite Series wins. So that's rarefied air.
Wow.
He is the 4th to win Elite Series events in 3 consecutive seasons.
That's impressive right there.
And he's also the second youngest, besides Brandon Polinick, to reach his 3rd Elite Series title. He's 36 years old.
Good grief.
Like I said, he's making a name for himself. It's pretty impressive what Mr. Lee Livesey has done. Plus, he's got the best saying in the game where it's a bad day to be a bush lion. And he can say it after he catches them or after he doesn't catch them either. It's like the applicable saying.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
I wanted to round that out with the spot that talked about the Bass Tank Power Harness.
Yeah.
And this was one of the reasons that I wanted to have you in. Obviously, it seems so. There's like a number of companies that I've noticed over the last couple years that have come out, and now all of a sudden it's all about wiring and gauge of wiring and get our wiring system, harnessing system. And this is where I don't really understand how it works, because boats come from the factory. You turn your units on, the units work if you have them installed, and you roll with it from there. But I was looking at that ad, and I've seen a lot of the guys that are going in and going, well, I went and I upgraded my gauge as a gauge and wire and all that. And then we run that ad. Explain how that works and the wiring in the boat. We talk all about the systems and the features and what we talk, but what is this power harness? How does this matter? How does this help me in the end catch more fish?
So at the end of the day, I'll try to break this down as simply as I can, without getting too nerdy, because I have that tendency. But imagine you've got a power washer, a gas powered power washer, that you've hooked up to your house water hose.
Okay.
Right? And that power washer is going to basically increase that pressure. It's going to send it through a nozzle of your choice to create a very precise, high pressure, output.
Okay.
That is based on a certain range of water pressure incoming. So if I feed that with like really, really low pressure, that power washer is going to essentially struggle to maintain that high level.
Underperform.
It's going to underperform. Exactly. One word, underperform. If I feed it with its designed, pressure, or even, feed it with a little bit higher, not overpressure it, but that thing is going to be able to perform to its capabilities. And so think of the electronics, the graphs, kind of as that power washer, where the battery at the house is the water supply, in your boat is the water supply. The wire is the hose that feeds the power washer. And so if I restrict that wire size, I do not get electrical flow. So that electronic is going to underperform. Now, I can get into the science. I can get into the actual calculations.
Do it just for a second. I'm just curious. I mean, don't heck, do it. I'm just curious. I just want to see if I can even follow this, Scott.
All right. So basically what we're talking about is voltage drop.
Okay.
So when I start getting voltage drop,
less power.
So if I start at my battery at 12 volts, now different batteries fully charged are not going to be 12 volts. That's just a general statement, just like
11.7, 11.9.
Exactly. Or most of your batteries, when they're charged, depending on whether you run lithium, AGM, or lead acid, are going to run anywhere between 12.4. Lithium are typically going to be 13.1. So, but we use 12 volt as a general, just for universal. So on a 12 volt battery, if I run, there's a calculation that says if I go 10 feet, I'm going to have a voltage drop of X.
10 feet of
just from that. If I have a 10-foot run of wire, I'm going to have a voltage drop of X if I'm trying to pull X amount of current.
Because it takes energy to move energy.
So basically, the wire has some resistance to it.
Okay.
Now it's very low, but
so it's going to absorb some of the energy as it travels.
Yep. Exactly. So essentially, you're burning more calories walking to the end of your driveway if someone is pushing against you the whole time than if you just walk up there freely.
Okay.
Each time you're burning calories, but you're burning a lot more if someone is literally pushing against you the whole time. So wire is resisting the flow of electricity, in a sense. I mean, it is just because it's a material that is consuming electricity, and so it generates heat. So we're assuming this is at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, by the way. That's the other side of it, is if you're in a hot environment, it's even more critical because your voltage drop is going to go up. You're going to have more voltage drop at higher temperatures because as electricity flows, it increases heat. And if I have heat, my resistance goes up as well. And so I'm going to consume more. So essentially what's going on is when we run these general calculations, we always assume 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And there's some temperature corrections for that. Really, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we're sizing things to consider that too much because we're only going roughly 20 feet. I mean, on a 20-foot bass boat, give or take 20 feet. So that's typically our
that's still 2 stories.
It is. I sometimes I think like, man, 20 feet is so deep. Then I turn around and look at my boat. I'm like, that's not that deep. And then it's like, oh, okay, but it is kind of far. So so essentially, as we continue down, with the resistance, the wire resisting our flow of electricity, I need a bigger gauge wire because as the cross diameter of the wire increases, my resistance actually goes down, more surface area. So if I've got a smaller gauge wire trying to pull 10 amps, A, that wire is going to get very, very hot, and B, it's going to resist the flow of that electricity and that current. So I'm going to work my battery harder. My electronics are going to underperform. Now, if I put a big gauge wire on there,
underperform meaning lag, turn off, flicker, brightness.
Yes, absolutely. All of the things that we get calls about. I'm like, well, what age is your boat? And I'm not. This is not a knock on boat manufacturers, but going back to say the 90s or the early 2000s, even 2010s, they didn't have the electronics power requirements. And so guess what? The factory wiring was not up to par.
Okay, so I didn't want to get you off track because you have to go back on track. We were just describing what was happening. But the way I'm putting this in layman's terms is the nozzle, the spray gun of your power washer is designed to be, it's bigger, it's more powerful, it's requiring more water, and the hose is staying the same. And they're saying, get this, so you've got this crazy powerful power washer head, and now you just can't get enough water to it. So you instead of upgrading the whole thing, they're saying, here's a new hot nozzle, and they're explaining everything that it can do, and everyone's going, well, it's the same or worse now.
To some degree, yes.
To some degree. Okay, so get back on the track that you were doing with the wire. We were talking about the 20 feet and the...
So we're going to get, hang on, I'm doing a little bit of math here.
You're doing math in your head on the show. That's a BTO first in 18 years.
Sorry. Do you want me to stop? Do I need to stop?
No. Keep doing it. Can you see numbers?
Some degree, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. At 10 feet, at 10 amps on a 12 volt DC system, we're going to get about, I would expect to get on a 14 gauge wire, you're going to get about 0.8 voltage drop.
Yep, that's what I got.
Okay, all right. So he followed me up there. So think about that. I'm at a 12 volt system. Even if I start at 12.5, I've got almost a full volt worth of drop at approximately 10 feet.
Is that significant?
That is huge. So now I'm running a system that is designed to run 12 volts or higher I'm starting the day at 11.5.
Starting the day before you've even made a cast.
Exactly, before we're even consuming the battery.
National Anthem isn't even over.
Exactly. Now, something of note of DC electronics. DC. So that's what our even your computer screens, they're fed with AC, but there's a rectifier in there that turns it to DC. Our graphs are a DC system, right? AC versus your house is AC powered, your electronics are DC. I can see the look on Matt's face.
I'm good. Just keep going.
DC electronics do not want to be under voltage. So you'll see the manufacturer spec to say, hey, 10.5 to 24 volts. They would rather run at 14 volts than 11.5. They're going to perform better at 14 volts than 11.5.
Okay.
It's just the nature of DC electronics, the circuit boards and everything else. And so it's going to take more current. Also, as that voltage drops, it's going to take more current to produce the same element. So I'm going to consume the battery more. I'm going to generate more heat. Heat in DC electronics is a bad thing, so we definitely want to keep them cool. Now, I want to stop right here. The manufacturers do a very good job of creating heat sinks and dissipating that heat at the unit. So I'm not knocking them at all, because they all do a very good job of that. They spend a lot of money making sure they don't overheat because of the conditions we put these units in. But I don't want to influence any more internal heat than I have to.
Control the controllable variables.
Exactly. There's variables we can't control, so we control the controllable variables. So I would rather my electronics run at 12.5, 13.5 than 11.5. And then again, if I'm starting the day at 11.5, how long do you think I'm going to last? My unit's going to lag. It may not get the clearest image. It may not, it's just not going to perform. I'm going to get goofy things to happen that a simple wiring upgrade could fix. And, we spend a lot of money on these electronics, and when you look at the cost of that versus the adding just an additional upgrade of wire, it's a no-brainer in my head. There's certain things that are no-brainers to me that say, okay, I've spent all this money, why would I not spend it here? Why would I fall short here? It's like buying the best rifle in the world, if you're any hunters out there, and then shooting the cheapest ammo you can find. That fouls, that misfires. Why am I going to do that? I'm not going to. I'm not going to save in certain areas. Of course, I don't know if there's anything such as cheap ammo right now, but just because ammo prices are through the roof if you can find it. But anyway, so I'm not going to cut short. I'm not going to skimp in that area. And that's even at a consumer. Yes, I mean obviously that's why we came up with it. Because we saw the problem. We originally had what we called our install kit. And this was trying to make wiring easier for guys, because not everybody can come to my shop for us to install it.
It's amazing to me how many people do from California and New York and Florida and Texas.
Yep. We have people travel a long ways, and so it's a sense of pride for me. Obviously, being on the technical side, we've got a great team in place, and
Darren does a great job.
Darren is absolutely awesome, and. It's funny, if you ever came up there and just was a fly on the wall, I'll tell you right now, we act like a family. We get frustrated at each other. We experience the highs, the lows together, and it's because my team is passionate about what we do.
Yeah, well, I've worked for Jeffries for 13 years, so you don't have to say.
Yeah, you know how it is. You work that
Yeah.
closely with guys, and it's because everybody cares. That's what it boils down to. If they didn't care, I would be a little bit more concerned if people were not frustrated with certain things, the way they transpire,
right,
than if they get upset because they're wanting it to be better. But sorry, got off track there. But at the end of the day, upgrading the wiring is it's a no-brainer because of the way DC electronics want to function.
How do you know? And I see Clyde on here talking about his Puma, and then Swim School saying what counts as bigger, and Clyde saying, should I upgrade it if the boat says it's coming with bigger? How do I know what gauge I currently have? Are there boat manufacturers that are coming with the same wiring that comes in the power harness now? How do I know where I currently stand with the wiring situation of my vessel?
Okay, so
is that a valid question?
That very, very valid question. Very good question. And realistically, from an industry standpoint, if your boat is older than probably a year or two.
So 2020.
Yeah, 22. And I'm not saying there's not a boat out there, but for the most part, the boat manufacturers, you have to understand how these boat manufacturers do it. They're producing boats for 2023. You know, they're looking at right now. And so it's hard for them in the middle of production, just all of a sudden this need pops up in the industry and they say, hey, we're going to switch this right now. That's just not
because
the way.
They have all these SKUs that go for thousands and thousands of things that have to go in. So they've already got their wiring across the board, regardless of brand, for the boat, and saying this is the wiring that's going into all of the 2022s, all of the 2023s.
Correct. So that stuff is already pre-bought. So that's, it's harder for them to react as quickly as the industry typically goes. But, if it says bigger wiring, most likely the biggest I've seen in a boat so far is 10 gauge wiring. And for the most part, 10 gauge wiring would be fine. So if you want to know if you need to upgrade your wiring, so take the number of units you have. Let's say you're running 2 units and
bow and stern, complete total, just in the boat.
Yeah, total. I'm not running any forward-facing sonar. I'm just running a graph up front and at the at the console. Let's say that's a 12-inch unit. Industry average for a 12-inch unit is going to be about 2 amps worth of a draw. And so I say, okay, I've got 4 amps, because I'm always going to be high. I'm always going to be conservative. I'm going to be overkill. I am, because the last thing that I want to worry about is my graphs going dead in the middle of the day. Mm-hmm. So then I need to see what the capacity of my battery is. Is my battery, you'll hear us talk about amp hours. So this is totally different than cold cranking amps. Cold cranking amps is just what it takes to start the motor, and there is no direct correlation between cold cranking amps and amp hours. So you need to know the amp hours of your battery. So let's say it's 100 amp hour, and I'm going to consume 4 amps. So that's 4 amp hours. So essentially I can run 25 hours off that one battery, if nothing else is, running off that. Now, that's just what I can run. That's sizing the battery. Now let's talk about the wiring itself. If you can, I don't know if anybody can see, but, I've got a relatively, I don't think I've got sausage fingers, but, my pinky right here, if you just take your pinky, that is roughly the size of about probably a 4/0 wire. So then if you look at the nail, the nail on your pinky, that's going to be maybe a 2 gauge or 4 gauge. Just inside that, just below that size of your pinky fingernail is about an 8 gauge wire. And on the wiring, it should say, this is 8 AWG, or on the coating, on the wire itself, on the label. And so if you're smaller than 10 gauge, you absolutely need to upgrade. And I can make that statement across the board because you've got voltage drop. I had an older boat, and I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to pick on any boat manufacturer, because that's not what we're here to do, because it was across the board. But you open it up and there was 16 gauge wire running from the back. I'm like, how did this ever work? Well, when you look at it, there was a flasher in my dash. Well, there was really no power requirement, so it was applicable for the time. Well, then you start adding a 9 and 10 inch graph. Okay, well, now here's a 10 and a 12, and you start seeing these weird.
And you're not doing anything with the wire; you're just installing it, and you're splicing into the same power source that was basically doing a flasher, or a 5-inch, 6-inch screen, and now you've got issues.
Now you've got issues, exactly.
And then the people are going, my graph doesn't work, and they're blaming the graph companies rather than the root of the problem, which the graphs are functioning 100% properly. They're just not being fed.
Yep, that's exactly correct. So take a look at the wire, wherever your power is coming into. If you did a self-install, you know exactly where that connection is made. Go take a look at that wire coming back, and see what it's looking like. It should have the name on it. And if it looks like a phone cord, if it's a little bitty wire, I mean, you'll look at it and say, man, this is obvious, because there's a distinct difference between a 12 gauge wire and a 10 gauge wire and bigger, 12, 10 and 8 gauge wire that gets much bigger. And there is a point where, again, I am an overkill guy. But there is a point where we've gotten so big that it makes it difficult to jump from this wire, because somebody is going to say it here in a minute. I know, because you've got smart listeners. The power cable from the units is typically a 14 to 16 gauge wire. Well, Scott, what about the voltage drop there? Well, let's go back to our length, right? So it's within that 10-foot range, that we're not going to have that same voltage drop. So I don't want to have a voltage drop and then another voltage drop.
Right.
So that voltage drop there, you're probably looking at, a tenth, which is another question I get. I don't know if I'll go ahead and jump into this real quick.
Jump into whatever you want.
A troubleshooting standpoint, I get guys saying, hey, my unit has voltage, but it won't come on. And I say, okay, well, what is your voltage you're reading? Well, I'm reading, 12.1. All right, well, where are you taking that measurement? Where are you taking that? Well, at the end of the plug. Okay, well, the problem with doing that, taking a voltage reading with your plug, here, so I've disconnected from the unit, I'm taking my voltage reading right here, is that could be a floating voltage. And what I mean by floating is DC takes a positive and a negative, and then there's a ground. So we call the negative a common, a negative, whatever. It's not a ground. So when people say, oh, between positive and ground, no, you're not actually grounded. It's the negative, because I'm going back to the negative of the battery. But when I take that reading with the, on the cable itself, I'm not loaded. So when I hear that says, hey, I've got 12 volts at the plug, I instantly think, go check your negative connections, because I may have just enough of a connection on that negative to give myself 12 volts. But as soon as I put a load on it, think of a light bulb, guys. Light bulb is a load. It's a coil of wires. I flip the switch on, light comes on. Well, that's just an element in there heating up. That's what's producing the light. The graphs are a load. So as soon as I put a load on it, if I don't have a good connection on my negative, my common, that will drop down. And so I may not be getting power. So the best way to actually test that is with it connected to the unit. Find a spot like maybe where you made the connections. If you went to a terminal block, or if you're using our harness, where you can get into the connections, test it right there while you're trying to turn it on. That will tell you what you're actually getting from a voltage standpoint. And that's a big one we get. I get that question a lot of, hey, this won't turn on. Now, I'm not saying that things don't happen, and okay, but we have to diagnose that, because we have had units come back and we put it on the bench, we test it, boom, and it fires right up. Well, that was a wiring issue. I mean, at the end of the day, and I'm not knocking anybody from that standpoint. It's just, we've got to go through those troubleshooting steps. And so that's one of the things that I always see with, checking voltage.
All right. So the power harness, like in that commercial, and don't think I've ever seen one in person, but it looks like it's just like in a bag that you like ship it out,
yeah.
right? So it's, you can either, I'm going somewhere with this.
Yeah, okay.
You can either go to the bass tank, have it installed.
Yeah.
You can do it yourself if you have a knowledge base of how to do that. You understand basic wiring. I know a lot of our listeners do, but I don't. That's just not how my brain works. Like, I'm good at some things, I'm not good at others.
Yeah.
Electricity, wiring, that type of stuff isn't. But I can like buy this and then have someone else install it too, like where I live. Like, I don't have, that's the whole part of this is, hey, this is the right stuff, and it's pretty easy. It's like, if you have a rudimentary knowledge and understanding of how it works, you can do this pretty quick.
We tried to simplify it as much as we possibly could, because
I know there's a bunch of people who are out there like me going, I know I need this, but I have no idea. I would just have this like coil of wire and be like, oh, this is cool. What now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why we tried to simplify it, to the point where, honestly, if you can match colors, you can install this.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? That's how we tried to design it, that if you can just match up colors, the red goes to the positive and the black goes to the negative. We even included we included a breaker that can serve as a disconnect as well. And the jumper between the battery to that breaker, and then you install the other red lead to the breaker, the black lead to the negative of the battery, and then you just install the red and negative, the red positive and black negative to the red and black, respectively, on the power cable of the units. That simple. We offer the double and the single. The single is for one section. That's typically it's a little bit longer. It's just for dedicated.
That's what it looks like, by the way.
Exactly.
Like, I would just be like, oh my gosh, it's a lot of wire in a bag.
And once you get it out, it's not that you just stretch it out and you say, oh, here it is. But the single is for the for running from the battery to the stern.
Okay.
All the way up to the bow. And the double is for all the way from the battery to the bow, and then with another drop at the console itself. So that's how we designate it from that standpoint. And when we designed it, yes, there's a guy, if he says, hey, I'm running one unit at the bow, one unit at the console, it is overkill. But what I don't want people to do is install this, and then a year down the road, they add a third unit. They add forward-facing sonar, and that load jumps up. They're like, well, okay, I got it again. So I'm trying to design this where you spend your money one time, and it fits your every need you have, for the future.
I know when I said, hey, come in, I want to do a troubleshooting show.
Yeah.
So we're an hour and 11 minutes in, and it seems like after this segment, I wasn't even planning on, I didn't understand it. That power or lack thereof power is the genesis for probably over 50% of the issues people are having with graphs that you're seeing right now.
It's a big one. Again, it's trying to get caught up to the power requirements, so yeah, it is a big one. It is a very, very big one. It's from the get-go when we started the Bass Tank, that's what we did, was addressing that need and going with proper gauge wire. And, I was a lot more hands-on, I started, when we first started, I was doing the installs myself, out of my shop, put my boat on skates and literally shoved it in a corner because I didn't fish because we were trying to serve customers. And then it got to the realization that not every customer can come to us. So how can we still serve those same customers? And that's how we came up with the install kit. And then we said, well, let's make this easier. Guys, this may not be the last harness I design. I'm going to find something that's easier. And so we're always trying to do that, to make it simpler for our guys. But that is a very big portion. The other one that I get, because I thought about when we talked about, me coming on and different things, I said, what is one of the biggest questions I get? And I can tell you, what do you think the number one question I get? The wiring is sometimes, people may not realize that's the problem, but what do you think the number one question I get is? What do you think that is?
In regards to just in general at the Bass Tank, if someone was to say, what is the most asked question?
Yeah.
How do I know what I'm looking at?
That is a big one. That is a big one. When we're talking about forward-facing sonar, it's, hey, how do I know that's a crappie? How do I know that's a bass? Or
how do I know my stuff's working right?
Exactly.
Okay.
One of the biggest troubleshooting that I personally get and see, that I get emails on, is not even related to forward-facing sonar.
Okay.
It is my unit will not lock on the bottom. I can't get depth.
Really?
Yeah.
On just 2D?
2D, yeah.
Regular old, not regular old. I mean, it's still pretty.
Still very
mind-blowing on how it works.
Yeah, exactly. And it's still very relevant as we,
the unit will not lock onto the bottom.
Yeah. And the number one answer is, I'm going to start with, are my units networked? And is it locking on the bottom when my trolling motor is deployed? Because the number one problem I see is, and either it was never set up or it was set up in auto, they're actually getting depth from the transducer that is in the trolling motor. So they pull that up and they go to graph around. Well, now it's just seeing air, and you're not going to get any bottom lock. And so go into your unit settings and make sure that you're actually selected the right transducer for the console to be in the rear, because that's it right there. Make sure the source is actually where you want it to be. And each individual graph is a little different on how you get there, but they all have that capability if you're networked. But that is the number one thing that I get, because I was like, man, that's relatively simple. Now there are other factors in there as well. There's a few little off, where it's like, hey, did my glue and hole transducer come unglued? That is a thing as well. Did my transducer, if you ever say, hey, I just went through Lake Fork and all of a sudden I can't get reading. Well, did you have an external transducer that got popped up because you rolled over a stump and it's up at an angle? So there's a couple of those one-offs. But
that was a question I have. So I've had that before, where your transducer, because it's designed to flex and move so it doesn't break. And I know that you could do a whole show on just the process of making sure your transducer's installed properly, so you're seeing what you're supposed to. But you've had it for a year or 2 years, and it's been up and down, and it gets a little wonky. And it looks straight and stuff. But if you're, especially I want to say on like a side imaging deal, and I know just take forward facing out of this. This is just a question. I mean, if you're a degree or two off, is that drastically impacting what you're seeing? Like, at what point is it like, hey, I need recalibrate it or have it looked at? Or
so the thing is like the up and down, is designed, and there's teeth with little rubber washers.
I'm just saying, if you walk around a boat ramp with any boat that's not a 2022, 23 on the trailer, you see all sorts of different ways that transducers are attached, connected on the boat. And I'm like, there's no way all those are seeing what they're supposed to be seeing.
There's not. And it may have never been installed, from the get-go, the proper angle. But yes, there's teeth. There's little plastic teeth on it, and the more you run that up and down, guess what? It's gonna round those off a little bit. So over the course of time, that may get looser, and so it may flop. 1 degree off, not a huge factor unless you're trying to range out there to 100 feet. The further you get out, 1 degree is going to. The further I get out.
Well, I want to see what's out there at 100 feet, especially if I'm in a tournament and only practice for 3 days.
Yeah, exactly. But so yes, that can matter. But simply going back there, because every one of them have a little screw with with a nut. If you just tighten that a little bit, that will kind of help to keep that back again. What you want to do as it goes up and down, that's going to loosen up. So just go back there, take a Phillips head screwdriver, and you're not trying to crank this thing down. You want that to have some, give,
so you don't snap it off.
Exactly. That's what it's designed for. And so just tighten that up, or it may come to a point where you say, hey, this $20 transducer bracket needs to be replaced. And you just replace the transducer bracket without having to replace the transducer. So, that's, yes, if you're constantly in stumps and constantly having to adjust that up and down over the course of years, then
How do I know if it's level?
How do you know if it's level?
Yeah, like how do I know if it's in the right position for my side imaging? Because it looks fine to me.
Yep.
There's no way, as long as it looks fine, or do you have like a level or a bob or
so this is one of those things that it is very difficult to do sitting in your garage. And the reason being is, think of every boat out there. They're like this, right? And some boats are, when they sit in the water, they may be more level. They may be more back heavy. It's also
then you sit in it.
You're sitting in it,
like a bobber.
That's exactly right. And something with these bass boats, you've had a co-angler and they just walk from one side to the other, and you feel the whole boat rock. So how you load that boat also changes that angle a little bit. So, you have to kind of tune it to your boat. So I can set it there where it's level, and I say, okay, this is the water line. What we tend to do is, guess what? A lot of boats that come in, they've got a little bit of a scum line. So I can see how that boat is setting level. Oh. And so we try to level that up with it, because this is how this boat naturally sets.
So it might actually, out of the water, look like it's a little tilted.
Yeah, it may be tilted up,
And then when it sits in the water, it's level.
It levels out. Yep, exactly. Yep.
So you could have a lot of people that go, oh, this thing is tilted up out of the water. They level it. Then when they're in the water, it's actually tilted.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
You see that a lot? A fair amount?
Yeah. I'm observant. I go around. I can't help it. Like I said, I'm a nerd, and so I like seeing other people's setups. I just like helping people if I can. I try not to be overbearing about it, because not everybody cares, but or wants my opinion, and that's fine. But I do walk around and I look at things, and there's a lot of different things. I'm like, man, if he would do this, he would get a better image, but I try not to just say, hey man, because again, not everybody is very receptive to.
You just walk around at a tournament, and you just walk around with a sign behind that says, I will analyze your electronics for $100. Yeah. They give you 100, and you walk around and you tell them everything that you would do to make it work better. I bet you'd make $1,000 a BFL.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I don't want to come across as pompous or arrogant.
This is your job. This is what you do. This is what you specialize in. Yeah. Like we talked about beforehand, you visualize how all this works. You understand how this works. Yeah. Like when KVD is throwing a 6XD, he's not just chucking it out into the abyss and going, holy cow, I caught another one. Yeah. He knows where he's throwing, why he's throwing. He understands what's down there, what he's deflecting it off of, and how it works. Yeah. The average person doesn't. That's how you are with electronics. I bet you wish you were like, you mean you're a good fisherman, but you don't understand what I'm saying.
No, absolutely.
That's how you are with the electronics. Yeah. You actually understand why stuff. That's why they call you the mad scientist, because then you take it a step further and say, here's how I can make it better. And then you go into the lab and start designing stuff.
That's exactly right. And, I spend a lot of time causing myself problems on the water. In tournaments, not so much. We're kind of in the middle of the season, so I've kind of backed down on that right now. I've kind of just got my boat set up to run and be efficient. But in the quote-unquote off-season, I do things to try to cause myself problems, because this is what my guys, this is what, your listeners, this is what our customers are going to go through, and I want to know how to answer those for them. I want to know how to come up with a solution. It's one thing to work through it, but I like to have solutions. That's what we like to do at the Bass Tank, is have those solutions as best as we can. And and going back to Darren, that's one reason why I love him, is he'll bounce things off me, and he will not let go of things. If something beats him once, it will never beat him again, because he's going to analyze it to death. He's going to figure it out, and he and I bounce each other, stuff off each other, and almost to an annoying level.
I quit telling him little bitty things that, I mean, it could be like, oh, I've got to get this sticker off.
Yeah.
And he's like, hold on.
Yeah.
So like just little bitty things that like while he's installing stuff I work on, I quit saying anything, because every time I was there, he would go, oh, wait, I can help you with that. Yeah. Oh, wait, I've got something for this. Or like if I'm like, man, I wish this did this or something like that, he would be like, okay, well, let's figure out how. And I'm like, no, I'm not asking that, but that's just how he works.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why I love him, because, it keeps me thinking, quite frankly, it challenges me. But also I know if we have a problem in the shop, or we come across a problem, he's going to be able to go get to the root, he's going to obsess about it, a lot like I do as well. And he's going to figure it out, and it kind of goes back to that passion I talked about with my guys, just across the board, and so that's what we do.
It's good stuff. Hey, we're talking with Scott Palmer from the Bass Tank. You actually have something that we set up, that if you want to kind of introduce a potential, we'll do that after the break, and then also get some of your questions in. I love this part of the show. This is Scott's favorite part of the show. Yeah. But we will take a couple questions via the messages. So if you're on the messages and you have a more so, I would say like general questions, not specific like stuff that what we've talked about, some things like that you want to try to get a better understanding of. You want to make sure that might assist you or whatever. I like these questions. I don't know what half of them are, but Scott does. So it's BTO on a Monday. We'll be back with the final segment right after this.
Combining one of the most popular hook styles with Gamakatsu's beefier Superline offering, the Gamakatsu Superline Offset Round Bend delivers the strength necessary to target big fish in heavy cover. Well suited for braided line and heavier fluorocarbon, the Gamakatsu Superline Offset Round Bend is built using stronger Superline wire that allows anglers to easily fish a finesse worm around heavy cover. The round bend offers a larger bite area, perfect for any worm presentation, while increasing your hookup ratios. The newly enhanced Z-bend holds your plastics on the hook longer, reducing the number of pull-offs and reducing damage to plastics. Available in 2/0, 3/0, 4/0, and 5/0, this is the most durable worm hook, designed for heavier lines that hold your bait on longer.
Preparation is key to success. And that preparation starts well before you ever hit the water. You're only as strong as your connection to the fish, and your line is that critical connection. Confidence in your line every minute, every day on the water is a necessity, and failure, it's not an option. Sunline makes the fluorocarbon, nylon, and braided lines to give you the strength to guarantee your confidence.
Vibrating jigs are a great choice for any time of year, and the Gamakatsu Swim-On is a perfect match for any vibrating jig. Two sizes and the unique tail design gives it a bait fish profile and a great swimming action for realism. There are 17 colors. See them all at bigbitebaits.com. The Spro Little John crankbait has been around for almost 15 years, and it is one of my go-to crankbaits whenever I need a fish in the boat, so you can never have enough new colors. That's why Spro's coming out with a handful of new colors, including Pearl Shad, which has this bleached out white look, but it's got this pearlescent, really, really pretty. We've got Copper Shad, which looks amazing in the water. It's got that purple flake on the back, really, really pops in the water. And then if you want some real pop, we've got Sparkle Shad, nothing but sparkles all over this thing. And then last but not least, we've got the matte sexy shad. Just a really different looking color for a crankbait. So you want to give them a little different look. That matte sexy shad is definitely the one to go with. All these colors are available in the original Little John and the MD. The new Android series is the peak of the Denali lineup and offers the ultimate Denali experience. The Android series features 36-ton multi-directional graphite combined with interlock blank technology for added strength. Each rod is outfitted with Royal titanium guides that will not fail. The blank is fitted into an easy-touch, soft-feel EVA foam grip with exposed blank reel seat. This all allows the Android to transmit every movement of your bait and even the most subtle bites. The Android series is the finest rod Denali has ever made and offers an angler the ultimate fishing experience with a limited lifetime warranty. See the full lineup of Android rods at denalirods.com.
Welcome back to the final segment. BTL on a Monday with the mad scientist at Bass Tank, Scott Palmer. And Scott, at one point in my life, I fancied myself an athlete. So I actually ended up at Oklahoma. Played hockey at OU. Well, I had a minute and 22 seconds after the last segment in between, because each commercial block I have to hit a button. Yeah. So I had the longest one scheduled, and I was 2 Red Bulls in. So we're an hour into the show, and I was presented with pickle.
Yeah.
Because I had to take a leak.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had a minute and 22 seconds, which involved some running, and now I'm out of breath. But I made it back with 6 seconds to spare. Otherwise, you would have just been sitting here live with nothing to say, no audio, no music, nothing.
Yeah, I would have talked. Not that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, but I would have told jokes. I would have gone in my stand-up comedian, routine.
Yeah, and, you'd have just been sitting there going, okay,
all right, yeah, want to hear a joke,
But you mentioned some of the questions you have, some of the stuff. I know we've talked about this before when John's been on, when you've been on, like Bass Tank business.
Yeah.
But you guys are, you don't have thousands of employees there.
Right, yeah.
So the problem that you guys run into is you're big on customer service, taking care of your customers, making sure people who have invested with the Bass Tank, part of that investment, when you go and you say, well, it costs that much to do it, part of that investment is you have the Bass Tank support team behind you. It's, for lack of a better term, not like a self-help hotline for someone who's never done anything.
Yeah.
But that being said, you every time you come on, you're like, man, I would love to answer these questions. I would love to help people out. I don't care if they're a Bass Tank customer or not in that. I enjoy helping people and managing their time and enjoyment on the water.
Yep.
So you've been mentioning about putting together like a hotline or an email or something to where if you had questions that were brought up because of the show, you have some interest in Bass Tank products, you just have a question about your own, you're like, I need to make something that I can send all the BTL listeners to that they can email instead of just calling the Bass Tank, and then for 2 days after the show, it's like a call. for lack of a better term.
Well, and the issue also is, I've got my guys answering the phone, and like you said, helping customers, and what happens is guys will call in and they're talking to a guy that has no idea what the question was, because
they're talking to like Austin or
and not that they're not knowledgeable, but you're trying to get a hold of me to get your question answered. And so what I'd like to do is I've set up an email.
Can I show that?
Absolutely. Show that right here.
Boom, there it is. The BTL listener exclusive email account that at some point in time Scott will get to.
Yeah. So I will be the only one monitoring this. So guys, please bear with me. I monitor about 5 different email accounts that I have to, just as a business owner and different things like that. But this is one of those where if we don't get your question, send it to this email address, and I will get to it, as quickly as I can. And there will be a delay, but I will get to it.
It is questions at thebasstank.com.
Yep, that's it.
So if you have a question about it,
now,
if they're just like, hey, I want to order this, and that's not where they go here. They call in.
They call in,
to the normal that's on the Bass Tank website and all that. This is something based on the show. You're wondering it.
Yeah.
Scott didn't get to it. You have a question that was brought up. Yeah. Questions at thebasstank.com. All one word. And I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was kind of spawned based on we get done with the show, And you'd be like, man, I could sit here and answer these questions all day. And there's a couple, I remember the last time there were a couple guys you were like, man, I wish I knew more information about this so I could really help him out.
That's correct. Yeah.
And it was genuine. You're like, I can't leave these guys hanging.
Yep.
So you created questions
Yep.
at thebasstank.com for BTL listeners who have electronics questions.
That's exactly correct. And so guys, like I said, I will get to that as quickly as I can. It will be me answering it, trying to take a little pressure off my guys as well. Like I said, it's not that they don't want to, but if you set in, like I said, a fly on the wall and saw how often the phone rings, just constantly, they'll get 14, 15, 16 calls behind. We are still a small business. It's been pretty much an amazing ride to see what we've been able to do with such a small team. And so I'm just trying to do whatever I can to take pressure off them, but also, again, help the BTL listeners out, because I wish I could give everything in my head. I'm not trying to hold anything back. I would give
that
it away.
was cool the day when you started talking in the foreign language. Can we ask them? Let's go to some questions that, unfortunately, because they're electronics based, I really don't know if they're good or bad questions.
Okay.
So I just throw them up, and if it's you can be like, yeah, no, that's an email question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sea Life Media says, is there a problem with having your GLS 10 on a different power source than you have your graph? Do they need to have the same power source?
The answer to that is no, there's no problem with that. I know there's a lot of guys that actually do that. They will get a small, lithium battery and just run the GLS 10, and then their graphs are on a different power source at all. So you're not going to have any problems there. The issue you're going to have, just to keep getting off in the weeds here a little bit, but something to keep an eye on, is look at the anodes on your boat. On your trolling motor, you're going to have an anode, and on the outboard, you're going to have an anode. And make sure you don't start getting bad electrolysis, because then you may have to go into a water grounder or something like that, to common those together. But for the most part, the answer is no. You're probably not going to have any issues at all.
Okay, this is a great question, because this is what we talked about the whole show. Then this was at the beginning of the show. He asked, what restraints are there when looking to add higher end electronics on a boat? Can an average weekend boat take on those electronics found on pro and tour level boats? I think I can answer this one, Scott.
Go ahead and answer this, and I'll.
Okay, so you have to make sure you have the proper volt batteries to handle it.
Yep.
Which, depending on how many batteries you can put in the back of the boat, could be an issue, because if you have an older boat that's only designed for 3 batteries, then they didn't anticipate the power needed to run it.
Yep.
But if you can figure out a way to navigate that to add a battery, you absolutely can, because now you have the power source, and you're obviously going to need to upgrade your wiring, though, because any wiring in there, that stuff didn't exist at the time. So if you can figure out the back of the boat or some way, you might even be able to run like a forward-facing sonar unit independently up front on a different battery, or go to a lithium batteries. And as long as you have the right gauge wiring and the power source, you could run whatever the heck you want on anything that floats.
Correct. And so to kind of...
Did I answer that right?
You're pretty much spot on. I'm going to add a little bit to it, but you could stop right there, and that would be a correct answer.
Awesome.
The thing to remember is the boat you see the pro fishing out of, like this past weekend on Fork, that boat is no different than what your average guy can walk into his boat dealership and buy. They don't make specific boats that say, hey, this is specifically only this boat right here. That the production cost of that would be outrageous. It wouldn't make sense. Plus, these boat manufacturers have these guys in these boats because they want to sell those boats and show you the advantages of that model. Now, not saying you've got a brand new boat, but even go back, to 2012, go back 10 years. Same thing. When those guys were running that boat at that time, the pros, your weekend angler could go do that. At the end of the day, boats, if you take the overall size of your boat, no matter what size it is, there's X amount of real estate. Think about building a house. Mm-hmm. I can only have, if I want 5 rooms in it, well, I've got to divide those 5 rooms up into, however much space I want. So you've got to decide, do I want to give this real estate to batteries, to tackle, to, whatever. And so if you've got to give, there's a point where you've got to give a little bit in the real estate to be able to add more batteries or, add more equipment. Because yes, every time I add a, quote unquote black box, to add another, network hub, a forward-facing sonar box, anything, another graph, it takes up room, and so, but yeah, the restraints are what you're willing to deal with, there's some really goofy things that we've done on some boats, and I say that lovingly because you're kind of getting, like, wow, we did that, but the customer was going to, every time they deployed their trolling motor, they were going to have to make sure their cable didn't beat up their graphs. And we told the customer that before we ever installed it, and they said, that's fine, I don't care. So it's kind of, there's that step of the restraint is literally what you're willing to deal with on the water when you go to move and things like that.
That's good stuff. All right. There are a couple questions about forward-facing sonar in less than 5 feet of water.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on that and how to actually actively use it?
So the thing is, you're going to decrease your depth, your depth range to, 10 feet or less, right?
You always set it on manual.
Yeah, always set it on manual. And so you're going to decrease it to the minimum. The thing to remember is at that point, I'm in a really zoomed location, right? And I'm not going to be able to use all of the beams that are available to me. So I'm getting to use...
There's 3 beams, right?
Yeah, there's 3 beams. And so the forward beam is basically what I'm going to be seeing at that point. So understand that the other 2 beams are kind of useless at that point. And so that beam is not going to have that other data to kind of make it composite.
The 3 beams stitched together
Correct.
to make one clear.
Yeah.
You know how
now they are different
I know
angles,
how I
right?
know
We
that.
went over, remember the old pizza thing and everything
Yeah.
else? Yeah. So they are different angles, but there is some overlay, some overlapping there where the stitching comes in. But you're going to see more clutter just because I'm putting a lot of frequency in a very small area. So when I'm sending that frequency out and coming back, there's a lot of noise there. My fish are also going to look bigger. You may be flipping at this fish and you're thinking, oh man, this is a big one. And then you catch it, it's a 14-incher. You say, what was that? So you just have to practice it just like anything. You've got to practice and prove it. And once you go do it, then you say, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. I use, my favorite is to shoot behind docks during the spawn. I can't see that fish, but I can shoot behind that dock and I can see that fish on a bed back there. Now, I can't actually see the bed specifically, but I can tell there's a fish that's staying in this one area. Guess what? That fish is on a bed. And so, yeah, I absolutely do it. Hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, it did. I feel like perspective mode hasn't really become the thing that everyone thought it was when it first came out. And I'm not saying that in a bad way.
Right.
I'm just saying... You don't hear a lot about it, and you don't see a lot of the perspective mode transducers on the guys' boats.
The thing with perspective mode is it doesn't give you depth, so it's at an angle. So instead of looking straight out, it's at an angle, so it's kind of looking down. So there's a blind spot close to the boat, underneath it. So if I'm sideways and I've got this 20-degree cone, can people see that? Hang on, there we go.
Not if they're listening on iTunes,
Okay.
but Scott's throwing up
basically a peace sign.
A peace sign sideways. It's a V shape.
Yep. And so then draw a straight line from the center point, from where the convergence point straight down. That's my trolling motor. Well, down here underneath this bottom line is the blind spot.
Yeah.
So if I'm out here too deep, I can't see those fish. They can swim out of it. I don't really know what depth those fish are. That's why the less than 10 foot is where it is. What we're seeing the trend of is guys running 2 forward-facing sonars.
Yep.
1 in perspective, 1 in forward, and that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Let's see here. Go back through it. Can you explain the difference between the through hull transducer and the GT54 for the back of the boat?
Yes, absolutely. So
there you go, Dax Marshall.
So Dax, one thing I just want to make sure I'm clear on: a through hull transducer actually puts holes in the bottom of the boat, and
you drill a hole. When it says a through hull transducer,
yep. So I'm being picky on nomenclature, but I'm trying to help guys understand. I believe I know exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about a glue-in hole, Dax, and I'm not trying to knock you there. Just everyone that's listening. A through hole is a drilled, like literally you'll see a fairing block that's drilled in there, and then the transducer is connected that way. You're going to typically see that in offshore vessels, like oceanic vessels. That's where the through hole, because there's nowhere to put it on the transom. The GT54 is a 3-in-1 transducer, so that transducer can do side, down, and 2D sonar, and it's going to hang off the transom of the boat. The glue-in hole transducer, like a GT8 or a GT15, is just that. It's a glue-in hole, but it's only going to give you 2D sonar. So that is the major difference in that. So typically, if I see a GT8 install where I've glued one in the hole, we're going to run something like a GT34 or a GT36, which is just a down and side imaging with either a Y cable if I'm going to one unit, or they're each going to run to a different unit. So then I get my 3 different sonars from that standpoint.
I could not have answered that question.
Well, I'm trying to educate you as well.
Okay, we'll give you one more GT54 transducer question.
Okay.
He's got a Lund with a GT54 transducer. I'll just post it.
Okay.
The deucer is mounted on the starboard side, and he gets poor port side images. He said, I assume this is hitting the motor. What is the fix for this?
So Gators, the first thing I would do, let's do a little bit of troubleshooting. Go out to where you see you have a poor image on the port side, and stop the boat, kind of get it idling, and then just put it in neutral, and then kill the motor and raise the motor. And let's verify that we are hitting the motor.
So that way you're still moving, so you're still generating
generating the image. So we're gliding along, or take your trolling motor if you can and drag along.
It's actually really smart.
And lift up the motor and see if we're getting it. Because if that's not the problem, then we start doing all these crazy things, and we're not actually addressing the problem. So let's make sure that's the problem. If that is the problem, Lunds, the way they're designed, unfortunately, is not great for side image
not transducer friendly.
Because you can't put it. The answer would be put it directly under the center of the boat so you can see both sides. Well, you can't do that on a Lund because the way they're designed on the transom. So we actually had a customer with this issue, and what he found was it was hitting the motor, and he trimmed up just a little bit.
And was golden.
So
every time he's side imaging, he just trims up.
Just trims up just a little bit. I'm not talking about even, really wouldn't even notice it. It's not like he's, chopping the top of the water, just a little bit, because it was hitting it just a little bit. And so let's start with that. And again, this is where the questions at thebastank.com. Follow up with me to let me know, and we'll see if we can't get this figured out for you.
That's awesome. All right. That was a good group of questions. I know you've got things to do. Places to go.
Give me one more. Come on, give me one more. You got a good one?
No, everyone's just saying perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
That was a great answer.
All right. Well, good. Then, guys, if you're happy, I'm happy.
One more. Okay, one more then.
Okay.
How can you tell if your focus is off with your 3 beams?
Okay, so when we talk about focus,
and this is for any forward-facing, the Lowrance, the Humminbird, the Garmin, it's all 3 beams that stitch together to create one image in a very general sense.
So,
or are they completely different technologies?
The Lowrance and the Garmin are similar with the 3 beams. The Humminbird is not. It's a single beam.
Okay. We'll just leave that out of the equation then. Let's just do the 3 beams.
It's a little different. So when we talk about focus, I do need a little more information on this, but there's a couple things that I will see if this is what he's talking about. So they have what's called a auto focus, or basically it's literally called focus. And basically, if your stitches look like they're really, you can see the stitches really hard.
What would that look like?
You'll see the sun rays. If you see the sun rays real prominent, or the bottom looks like it's going along. Let's say you're on just a flat, and it looks like the bottom goes along, and it's like hard 90 degrees where the beam would hit.
Mm-hmm.
Then my focus is out of
whack.
Is out of whack, and so you can go into your focus and basically say, "Hey, I don't want my focus to be out there at 200 feet. I want it to be at 65 feet," and that will you can literally, as you run that up and down, you'll see those beams stitched together better. So if that's literally the term focus. When I hear that, there's actually a setting for that. If he's talking about, clarity, that is always a settings issue from a standpoint of just going in and dialing in that unit for that body of water that time of day. Again, it's cloudy, thunderstorm here. My settings would be different than it was a high bluebird sky day on the same body of water. If I didn't answer
where the skill comes in.
That's where the time on the water and the skill comes in, and not being afraid to touch the units. Guys, don't be afraid to touch your units. Don't be afraid to push the buttons. Back up your waypoints, export them, and then go push every button on there, because worst case scenario, you can hit a factory reset and just go back to factory, then set them back up. So you'll learn more from pushing buttons and making mistakes than you will just me telling you what to go push, because then you'll understand why that was a mistake.
And if you do hit all the buttons and it's wrong, and you bought all your stuff from the Bass Tank,
exactly.
you can call up Scott and say, I hit all my buttons and I don't know what to do.
I just a funny little note here. I like to set up guys when they call me, they've got issues, and I'm like with settings or whatever, and I tell them how to do something. I'm like, hey, do this, and I tell them how to go save a preset, and I call it Scott's Save Me preset. And so if they ever get into a bad situation again, they go hit that button, and it just takes them back to it. Yeah, so
I drastically need that.
Yeah, but anyway, so
dude, I enjoyed today. I learned a lot. Thank you for making the drive down for the Bass Tank. Like I said,
thanks for having me. Thanks for.
If you have any other questions that didn't get answered, if you're listening to the replay of this and something tickled your fancy that you think maybe of assistance, questions at thebasstank.com. This is a side email specifically for BTL listeners, so it's not like hey, we'll get back with you within 4 hours. This is Scott on his own time, taking the time because he enjoys the questions from the BTL listeners so much, so he will eventually get to it. If you have questions about purchasing products you've already purchased, things like that, then just go to thebasstank.com and call the customer service hotline right there on the screen from that. So hopefully
and guys, if you send questions, send me questions to that email. Pictures are always very helpful. If it's something like, hey, this is doing this, pictures go a long ways in helping me
Here's
dissect.
me with the 3-pound smallmouth. My unit doesn't work.
And I enjoy fish pictures too, so that's okay. That's okay.
Scott, thank you very much. Can we go grab something for lunch?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm hungry. All
right. Barbecue doesn't sound bad.
I like barbecue. I
think it stopped raining.
I think you guys can tell that I don't miss a meal. So
this has been BTL on a Monday. Tomorrow, Lake Fork recap. Got to have a Lake Fork recap after 113 pounds. We'll talk to everybody tomorrow. That's it.